Welcome everyone to this first AMEA Toolbox Webinar Series. And it's also the first webinar that we're having this series. We're going to be presenting today the Agribusiness Leadership Program, ALP, and the 3 tools of ALP that are currently in the AMEA Toolbox. So the objective of this webinar is to, as I just said, present the latest developments of those 3 tools, right? So the ALP Foundations of Cooperative Management, the Bookkeeping Essentials, and the Last Mile Retail. But we also asked the presenter, which is IFC today, to prepare a presentation to stimulate deep discussions around the scalability and sustainability strategies of the tools, and how it can contribute to your programs and scalability and sustainability strategies as well. But also we asked IFC to prepare a presentation that also look at how those tools can contribute to a broader goal of all of us, right? Which is the sustainability and efficiency of ecosystems of business development service provision to farm organizations and agro-SMEs. Finally, we also would like to have a look at the costs and cost effectiveness of the tools, so to understand the structures of and what we need to take in consideration when implementing those, and reflect a little bit on the implications on the product. So without further ado, I will pass the mic now to Rosemary Mahoney, who is a short-term consultant for IFC and a subject. So Rosemary, thank you for being here, and the floor is yours.
Okay, let's see if I can share my screen. I've gotten into a mode that, oh, there we go. Sorry about that. Showing my age. Well, hello, everyone. So I've been asked to talk to you about kind of the latest developments and what's going on with ALP. And just a little background, I've worked with the ALP program since its inception. And as Felipe said, I'm a cooperative specialist by training, but do a lot of, which of course means agribusiness as well. I didn't prepare anything in terms of latest changes on foundations, but I did take the opportunity, since we're talking, I wanted to show you a little bit about what we're doing in terms of digitizing this content and making it available in different forms. And so I think that's going to help us when we talk about some of the scalability questions and some of the implementation. I've got a lot of slides. I'm going to go through them relatively quickly. The deck will be yours once we're done. I hope it's shared. And then, but what I'd really like to do is have more of a conversation at the end about scalability, about costs, about, anybody's experiences in integrating some of these blended learning approaches. So with that, let's go ahead and get started. I did want to, kind of start with the methodology and stuff, because from my perspective, there's lots of content there. I think what ALP does is make that content into curriculum, and that curriculum is appropriate for adult learners. But I think the other kind of important piece of what we do is the methodology that we kind of believe in, to measure our impact as well as, or our outcomes, as well as to make sure that we're helping people apply what they've learned during training. I think it's easy to think about all of this as training, when really, unless they're making change, unless they're adapting what we're talking to them about, the training is kind of, in my mind, it doesn't have that much value. It's really the applying the skills and the things they've learned in their business is what really matters. And that's the measure of our success. So I'll talk a little bit about bookkeeping essentials, last mile retailer, go into the blended learning, and then some cost considerations. And I think Helena maybe is going to help me with that. So, when we started ALP within IFC, I mean, one of the, the challenges we had in the advisory side is, within IFC, really what the corporation is trying to do is to improve the access to credit to small and medium-sized businesses. When we look at agriculture, a lot of our clients, a lot of the areas we're working, that agriculture is based upon the production of smallholder farmers who are, deeply fragmented in most markets. They lack access to markets because of that fragmentation. They have low business management capabilities. And so what we were looking to do was, could we develop a program that helped to strengthen individual farmers by measurably improving the skills and the professionalism of the agribusinesses that serve those farmers. So ultimately, our goal is to improve the success of these farmers, but we're doing it by targeting resources towards the intermediaries. And in our case, that's producer organizations, usually cooperatives, retailers, as well as what I would call a lead farmer, or there's a lot of different names, right? Village-based agent, lead farmer, model farmer. And we have programs for all of those. In terms of the products the ALP products that are in the AMEA portfolio, we have the Foundations of Cooperative Management, which really is targeted at cooperative leaders as well as hired managers within a cooperative. We have Last Mile Retailer, which is really, when we say last mile retailer, what we're talking about is that retailer who is selling directly to farmers. And they can be, as you know, they can be just really of a wide range of scale. They can be very, very small, working out of a kiosk, or they could be, kind of a regional retailer that also sells to smaller retailers, but also sells to individual farmers. And then one of the courses we developed early on was this Bookkeeping Essentials, because we found that a lot of our enterprises, they just didn't have the basis to do record the cash, record the sales, record the expenses, track assets. And so we put together this real skills-based course that's targeted towards whoever in these enterprises is responsible for the bookkeeping functions of the enterprise. And the one thing I really want to mention was that Last Mile Retailer was developed in partnership with CNFA, also an AMEA member. And so that tool has been available to AMEA from the very beginning. It was a kind of an AMEA effort to develop that. And then I also want to mention that the Foundations of Cooperative Management and the Last Mile Retailer are both directly linked to the scope assessment tools. So Foundations links to scope basic, and Last Mile Retailer links to scope retailer. Okay, just a few statistics. And this gets into the scalability, because I think for most of us, we feel like we have, at least I feel like ALP is pretty good content. And I've been working with it for, I think, 7 years now. And when I see we've only done 40 projects, I think, whew. But, I think we've also developed a lot of good products. So I think this is our challenge going forward. How do we really scale this, and how do we make it accessible to more people? These are the numbers that we've reached. I also suspect maybe our counting isn't exactly where it is. So consider these estimates, but this includes both AMEA and IFC. And we use this a lot within IFC. Someone said to me recently that if we didn't have the ALP, we wouldn't have anything for working with cooperatives and retailers and agricultural value chains. This is just a little word cloud, I guess, to show which countries have received the most in terms of, or participated the most in terms of ALP. And then we have the types of products. And you can imagine cocoa and Ivory Coast are pretty tightly connected there. Just to touch base, I think we probably all know this. And also, I should say, if I'm speaking too quickly, please tell me. And if you have questions, raise your hands, and hopefully Felipe can help. We can stop and have discussions as we go. But what we see in the ALP methodology, and we believe this is really important, is that you start with an assessment so you understand, where is that enterprise? And that enterprise understands kind of where are they operating? What are the things they're doing? Where are the areas that they can improve? And in the training, we reinforce that. We always refer back to the scope assessment and say, okay, look at your scores, and then let's talk about, for this value chain, what are the things that you should be able to do to be a really kind of strong partner, a strong enterprise in that value chain. And then the coaching, to me, I think we've underemphasized this in ALP, but in my opinion, this is one of the most important pieces. This is where someone sits down one-on-one with the enterprise or the business owner and helps them apply what they've learned in the training to their business. So this is where change really happens, right? You can train people all day and maybe not get change, but if you sit down with them, coach them, help them implement that change, that's where I think the value really lies. And it may be because I've spent my whole career as a consultant, but I think it's that piece to me is really critical, and we have to be careful not to under-resource it. And then reassessment, so we can measure what kind of change we've had. Now, in some of the projects I'm working on in IFC, a lot of times because of our project timelines, you get a little bit of delay. You're kind of doing the reassessment like 2 weeks after you did your final coaching visit. But we're building in a 6-month buffer so we can see, 6 months isn't that long, but we at least have a little bit of time to see whether they're still doing the things that they were doing 6 months after the coaching has ended. And this is within IFC, this is always how we implement. We do a training needs assessment so we can really understand what it is the client, we are always working with a client. So we're working with some sort of a corporate client who wants enterprises strengthened in their value chain. And so we need to understand the client's strategy, what resources the client's putting out there, what resources are already available to these enterprises. And then, what are the enterprises able to do today? And what is it that they're expected to do? And then, what can we do to help close that gap? And that's the strategy, the implementation strategy. And then we do the baseline assessments. Sometimes when we're lucky, those happen at the same time. That's ideal that we can get those assessments as part of the training needs assessment. But every project's a little different in how that works out. Sometimes that happens first, sometimes that happens second. Sometimes it happens at the same time. And then we always customize the curriculum to the needs, translate it into local language, and then we do, get all of the materials ready for the project implementation. We do a training of trainer with our master trainers. And at the end of this, I've put some of the ALP resources that IFC has in the field, master trainers, things like that. And so, you would be welcome to talk to any of them to use in your projects as well. And then we do the reassessments. And if there's some additional work we can do to help them link to markets, a lot of times that's based in the project as well. So this is a little bit on bookkeeping essentials. This, as I said earlier, this is really targeted towards whoever in the enterprise is responsible for the bookkeeping. So we make sure that we help them understand the accounting cycle, how to collect, handle, store source documents, which, as you know, are very important to any sort of enterprise that has to produce financial statements or has to produce audited financial statements. And then the processes for recording the financial transactions in the ledger. We do not try to train them into creating financial statements. We train them to do, prepare everything that would be needed for financial statements. Is there a question? Okay. And so really at the end, we want them to understand, obviously the importance of bookkeeping and record keeping, how to maintain a record keeping system, and how to enter all the transactions in the various ledgers that they might be keeping. If you were doing the full course, all the content that's in this course, we estimate it would take 4 days. I personally believe that this is a course that really needs some coaching afterwards, some time spent with the bookkeeper, checking in to see how they're doing, helping them record. And I would argue it also needs to really emphasize that they should either send 2 people to this training, or when they get back, they should start to train somebody to do what they've learned. So you have some redundancy in the business. It's quite a risk to only have one person who knows how to do this. These are the modules that are in the course. And as you can see, it's all the ledgers. I almost always use the cash ledger module in any training I'm doing. I may not always have time to do bookkeeping essentials, but I oftentimes pull content from here and put into the curriculum that I'm customizing for a project. And I like this course a lot. I think it's pretty straightforward. I think it's reasonably simple. And has value when you have time to implement it. On the AMEA peer review, the feedback was that we need to evaluate the effectiveness, and I think that is true. I think for us at IFC, if we had Bookkeeping Essentials in a course, our only real evaluation of that would be the change at the scope score. We don't go back in and do kind of look to see if they're maintaining those systems and how they're using them. But I do think you could drill into scope and probably really measure the change in that. It's not something we've done though. Again, I said coaching I think is critical to this one because it is skills based. You really want to. It's pretty easy to get stuck as soon as you get home. You get an invoice and you think, ugh, this is I didn't see this in class. How do I record this? And then, I think this was a recommendation that the implementation costs could be reduced when you deliver it in conjunction with other ALP training. That's true, right? You could do your TOTs together for both content. Again, I weave in some of the content, like with a model farmer course we did a few years ago. We took like 3 or 4 modules from Bookkeeping Essentials and made that, 1 day or 2 days of the training that they got, just as part of their model farmer training. Last mile retailer, we'll go through this again. Again, this one is, it's really targeted towards delivering basic retail management skills. So it's targeted towards the owner or maybe the manager of the business. I personally think if you had, I think this is a training when you have these independent businesses that are dependent on kind of one person to run them or to be there every day. Oftentimes there's a family member who is backstopping or is the succession plan if somebody gets sick or can't be in the business. I think if the project has the resources, it always is helpful if you can have them bring a family member or a key employee to the training as well. So you're not just training one person. But, we really want, this is really focused on the action plans. What are the topics that the things they really need to start doing in their business? I think for retailers, for me, I think oftentimes the customer service, the view of themselves as an enterprise are both important, but then inventory management is just critical because they almost always are cash strapped. And so if they're managing their inventory effectively, that can do a lot to help them with their cash situation. But they also have to be able to demonstrate that if they're ever going to get a loan. So this course, if you delivered all the content, would take 10 days. I don't know anyone who's delivered all the content. I will say that from an IFC perspective, this is the course we're getting the most demand for. We're getting lots of retailer projects right now. And so, we consider, both working with CNFA who brought in the expertise, but this has become a really critical piece to our offering. And we're also working to start offering it in non-agricultural settings as well. These are all the topics. And you see, one of the things with ALP, right, is that if you're running an enterprise, you're running an enterprise, and there are certain things you need to do. Your bookkeeping, managing your cash, customer care, business planning. So a lot of the content, kind of is pretty similar across the different enterprise types. Sustainability, but obviously if we're working for a retailer, we are tailoring this for the needs of a retailer. And I think this one, when you go through the material, you see it feels to me like it's geared towards kind of an established retailer. So when I'm working with retailers that are maybe less developed or maybe new retailers, this takes some customization to bring it down. And I tend to we have some curriculum we've developed that's targeted towards those model farmers. A lot of times they're distributing inputs. We'll pull in some of the material from that course that we have internally to support this last mile retailer content. In terms of the peer review feedback from AMEA, there was content that it tended to lack real context examples, and need to use more comics or make it more pictorial, particularly in terms of including gender and women in a kind of positive way. The use of more multimedia interactive visual materials, that's something we've certainly talked about, and I'll go into the blended learning a little bit, and I'd love to get your ideas on what you think we could do. That it doesn't seem to be geared towards people with disabilities or inclusiveness, and I would say that's probably absolutely true. I don't think we've done that much with any of our material. In some of our diversity content, we have talked about making sure that you make services available to people with disabilities in your community, and we, have that in the illustrations and the graphics, but it's not something we've kind of done across the board. I think it's a good idea. And I think the conflict management, we have some conflict management in there. I think we've been told that it's maybe needs to be deepened a little bit, that it might not seem very realistic to what people are actually dealing with in some communities. More emphasis on bundling. I totally agree with this. I think that's a really important piece. And I think particularly if we're looking at food security, the idea of bundling nutrition bundles, I think is something that we could consider. We are certainly considering, and IFC including in here, more interactive skits. I don't think you can ever have enough of those, and they tend to get left behind sometimes because of our time constraints. We emphasize content over comprehension, and I think to me that's a tension I have trouble with. I want to give as much content as I can, and then we end up having to short the activities, and that's not a recipe for success. And then sustainability needs to be beefed up, and that's the sustainability piece. To me, that's a module that is like one of the first that you customize, right? Each situation is a little bit different. They're handling different chemicals. They might have wastewater issues. They might have container disposal issues. You might have, storage issues. So and you have different laws and different rules and different requirements. And so that's always a module that's going to need some customization from my perspective. So I wanted to take just a few minutes and kind of walk you through what we're doing on blended learning, because this really gets to the scalability issue, right? That if we are locked into classroom training forever, which I really like classroom training, but it might be because I'm a little old, we're just going to be constrained on how much we can do. Does somebody have a question? Because anybody who knows me knows I'll just continue talking. So let me show you a little bit what we're doing. And what I would suggest to Mark and Felipe is that we get a little further along in this, that we have a session where we just focus on this and show you what we're doing and really demonstrate it. I was going to do it, but then I was afraid I couldn't make the technology work, and it's not really ready for prime time, or not really ready to be used broadly yet. But hopefully with another year of working on this, we'll have more that's available. But so for us, what we've been looking at are really 4 primary, what we call digital learning or blended learning channels. And we call it blended learning because for us, at least for me, we can absolutely put this up, make it available. People can come and get it. That's fine. I think for those of us who are working on a project level, to get to what we want in terms of outcomes and impacts, I think this is going to need some human interaction as well. I see this as something that supports what we're doing either in the classroom or for coaching. And I personally think coaching is going to rise up as being more important, and classroom training is less important as these tools are developed and realized. But so we have e-learning courses. So during the first year of the pandemic, this is how I spent my time. We took all of the content that we had in IFC and for ALP, and that included Foundations for Cooperative Management. It included Last Mile Retailer, and it included some of this Model Farmer and Bookkeeping Essentials. And we turned it into like small pieces. We turned it into 82 topics. And we did a video, or we digitized each one of those. Of course, they're only in English. The facilitation and coaching skills is also in French, but those are up on the World Bank's Open Learning Campus. And they're available for anyone. You just go register and you can view them. I'll show you a little bit more about that in a minute. We're doing mobile learning with a chat bot. So it basically text messages. There's 2 platforms. There's Telegram or WhatsApp. We've tested this in, I think 2 or 3 projects. I intend to use it in a project I'm working on right now in East Africa. I think it can be very useful to support the classroom learning. You know, just say, okay, it's time to be planning your meeting with farmers to, you know, take input supplies. You remember the things you need to do, you know. So I see this as something I can start using kind of immediately. We'll get a little bit more on that. Then we're working on Microsoft Community Training. That's what MCT stands for. So we have a partnership with them. We're taking our content, and I'll show you a little bit more in a minute what it is, but we're breaking it into learning paths. So you might have the governance learning path for cooperatives, and then there'll be 4 or 5, you know, short 5, you know, 2 to 10 minute, you know, probably 2 to 7 minute videos talking about organizing an annual meeting or something like that. And then there's little quizzes and things like that you can take. And then because of the pandemic, not surprised, I think probably like a lot of people, you know, a lot of our projects switched to virtual training and coaching. So there were webinars, there were, you know, a variety of different ways that we were reaching our clients when we couldn't get to the field. We learned a lot from that, quite frankly. And we learned some things that work pretty well, that we don't always have to be face-to-face. So this is a sample of the Open Learning Campus. And like I say, this is available to anyone. I've got the links later in the presentation, so you can go and use these. I mean, right now, because they're in English, I think where they maybe might be most useful would be for like training your staff, training, you know, refreshers for the trainers, things like that. But I did want you to know that they're available, and you can be recommending them to anyone who you think might be have interest in them. And so we started doing this. We put it up on OLC, our Open Learning Campus, World Bank Open Learning Campus, in March. And since then, there's been, you know, quite a few registrations. So I suspect some of this is people who are internal to World Bank. We use this for when we have to take, you know, security training and things like that. Open Learning Campus is available to us for internal training. So I suspect there's people who want to learn more about cooperatives or maybe retailers or whatever. Some of them are internal, but some of it's external as well. And the top 3 courses, interesting enough, sustainability, finance and accounting, and then inventory management. So again, here's the links. I think I could click on these to maybe get to it. If we have time later, I can show you what it looks like. But you know, this link will get you the full content. This will get you to the World Bank Academy, so you can see what else is there. The ALP materials are part of that, but there's a bunch of other stuff that you might find useful. And then this will get you to Bookkeeping Essential content. Oh, I didn't know this had functions in it. So in terms of the Agri chat bot, let me just get this all populated. The learning paths that are developed right now are the Bookkeeping Essentials, Retailer Fundamentals. I highlighted those because I thought that was the focus, but there's also fundamentals of cooperatives and then planning for your business. And this over here just kind of shows you like how the chats work as a flow. And this is, you know, what you're trying to accomplish. And so, you know, each path will have 5 to 10 modules. So again, it's been the content's been broken up into smaller pieces. Kind of micro lessons, I think you could call them. There'll be 5 to 7 messages per module. You know, when a user comes in, they register. You as a project manager can, you know, you'll get the data back on, you know, how far did they go? How many messages did they listen to? Did they click to? Did they take the assessment quiz? You know, and they get, you know, I think they can get little, you know, it's not fully gamified, but you can get little rewards for having used it. We can also push out tips, as I was talking about before. It's time to organize your input supply meeting. It's, time to update your cash ledger, whatever it might be. And these things can support the training or support the coaching. Your coach is coming in 3 days. Are you ready? Do you have your materials ready? Things like that. So I'm pretty excited about being able to use this, I have to say. And we can put it into, obviously, local language. This is what it looks like on a phone. This is a messenger screen. And again, it's available right now on Messenger and WhatsApp. And we call it the AgriChat bot. Now, this is the Microsoft community training that I was just talking about with the learning paths. Again, we're developing this, and so we're working through what does access mean for our clients and for our partners like AMEA. And with anything with IFC, there's all sorts of kind of licensing and rights, and certainly data privacy, which we should all be concerned about. So there's a lot of details to work through, but the intent of doing all of this is to make ALP more widely available and more not kind of contained in small boxes like IFC or AMEA. So we want it out there. We've worked on it. We think it has value. This is the MCT can be available on your phone as well as on your laptop. This is what the screen looks like. So you would, like, if I signed in, Amy Warren is managing this right now. She set me up. I have, I can see what courses apply to me, and I can take them and get my learning path certificate and take my quizzes and all of that. So again, I see this as definitely, I think, helpful for the trainers, but I think also for coaching. When a lot of times we work with, particularly if you bring cooperative leaders into a classroom, there's other leaders who don't get to participate. And so I see this could be pretty helpful for that, for getting the message out to members. This is just a screenshot of one of the videos about bad customer service. So again, in terms of learning paths, we have fundamentals of cooperatives, bookkeeping essentials, and retail fundamentals will be available by the end of 2022. Because we're still working through the issues with MCT, I have not been building this into my projects, but I think I probably will start doing that pretty soon. But we still have to work through what's it take to translate them, all of them. And let me this is where Helena, I think, is going to jump in and help me. But I know as part of these presentations, we wanted to have more of a conversation about costs. And let me just say, we're doing an internal study to really kind of get our arms around what does it cost to implement ALP. Generally when I look at it, when I'm running a project, I'm looking at what the TNA costs, what the customization costs, what the translation costs, printing costs, all of those are. But once it gets to the field, then I'm less involved in that. And so so what I did was I just put together a few considerations in terms of when I'm doing a budget. What are the things I'm thinking about? If we're doing a training needs assessment and strategy development, we always do that. We do that for every one of our projects. We are, and that, there's travel costs involved in that. And there's the staff consulting costs, so how many days and whatever the cost per day is, to bring this cost down and to help us scale and make ALP more available. And during the pandemic, we've started working a lot with our colleagues in the field, and we have them, and oftentimes they'll do the field work with like me as a subject matter expert, or for those of you who know Maura Schwartz, we'll support that activity, and then we'll help put together the training needs strategy. So, you're not always having to take a subject matter expert and send them to the field. That's helped quite a bit and reduce the costs. And I think we've learned when we can do that well, and when maybe we do need to go. And then in terms of the curriculum customization, the subject matter expert needs to identify what the customizations are, review the changes once they've been made. For us, we always use an instructional designer to do those changes. There's the translation costs and the printing costs. The rule of thumb we use internally is that if you're doing new content or like really heavy customization, for every hour of training, it takes about 8 hours of instructional designer time. And that's not just the time it takes them to make the changes in the curriculum. There's all the other stuff that goes along. You've seen the ALP training. So there's the handouts, there's the development plan, there's the timer, and then there's bundling all of that and making sure that it all flows and all of that. So that time is built into the ID time. A light customization, if it takes an hour of training, we would figure 2 hours of ID time, instructional designer time. And I think we're a lot aware of the customization. I'm coming around to believing that most of the customization that is needed, obviously currency, products, things like that, but it's around the activities and around some of the role playing and things like that can probably localize some of this material as much as anything else. And then trainers are trainers, and so you got your cost for your master trainer, your daily, if you have to pay the trainers to be there who are being trained, there's the daily fees for that, travel costs for everybody, facilitation, equipment costs, travel costs, food, housing, all of that. So we figure as a rule of thumb that for a TOT, we typically do full teaching of the content at IFC. So if it's a 5-day course, there's 5 days of teaching it. If we have experienced trainers, particularly trainers who have trained ALP before, we wouldn't do that full course content. We would do maybe a day and then have review and make sure the trainers have reviewed all the materials and talk through, make sure everybody understands it. We would still do teach back though. We would have them teach the material back to make sure they do understand it. There's facilitation and coaching skills, which takes about 2 days. We are currently beefing up that coaching skills piece. We think it's light. And then we would have like 2 days for teach back. And then you need your master trainer travel and prep days. So in terms of the inputs into a budget, to me, those are what you need. Now, when you get to the field, I mean, you guys have put trainings together, you know what your field costs are, right? So, all of those would have to be added in, but I haven't included anything here. Hi, Lena, was there anything you wanted to add?
I won't add anything now, but I imagine there will be questions from the group. So maybe at the end, I can help to answer the questions. But I think in terms of framing the general costs and how we go about calculating them, I think you've done, I think that was a great slide.
Okay. And so then just another things to think about, obviously for their trainers when they're going to field and you budget their time, they need days to prepare before they go to the training, right? There's the training days. A lot of times the trainers are also the coaching. So there's the coaching days, travel days for all of that. And then there's post stuff, right? They've got to, after they've done training, they've got to, kind of start to get ready for the coaching, wrap up whatever coaching training reports they have to do. And that's true for coaching as well. Participants, do you pay their travel? Do you pay their lodging? Do you pay their meals? Do you pay them a per diem? Are you bringing them together into a classroom or are you training them on site? So there's trade-offs between all of these categories, right? One of the things we started doing some of our projects, particularly if we're working with organizations that are relatively close together, is we do some peer coaching. So, it's really worked pretty well because they can encourage each other. They continue to learn together. They challenge each other. The feedback's been pretty positive, but it takes a coach that can manage, a room of 5 or 6, say model farmers or 5 or 6 agro dealers, who don't see themselves as competitors. I think one of the things we kind of forget sometimes, particularly like for these co-op leaders or even the lead farmers, it can be pretty isolating to run a business on your own. You don't get out and see other people who are doing what you do very often. And so giving them an opportunity to do that is really motivating and they can learn a lot from each other. So that's peer coaching is something we've done. The cost in our projects, it's not the training, it's not the customization, it's the coaching. The one-on-one part is what takes the most time and money on implementation. Blended learning, I think, we believe we can bring down some of the costs by using some of these blended learning modes that I just showed you. It's also possible, we don't encourage this, but you could do larger, we say generally you don't want any more than 25 in a class, but you could do slightly larger numbers, but I think you'd have to have 2 trainers or a trainer plus an assistant, something like that, to help with the activities, to help with the entries in the development plan, that sort of stuff. So that, to do a larger class size, I think you might end up just with a bit of a wash on costs. Unless you really are willing to cut quality. All right, that's what I have to present. So I'm ready for any comments, questions, suggestions.
Well, thank you for these incredible presentations, Rosemary. I think it was very clear and very exciting also to see what's been cooking in IFC. And I'm really looking forward to see the blended learning approach being implemented, and especially within AMEA. So just while we are at the costs, before I open the chat or the mic for the questions of the participants, let me just ask you quickly, there is a report being done by IFC regarding costs, right? Can you or Helena talk a little bit more about that and what we can expect, what will be public, what will not be public?
No, I'm turning that to Helena because I know that we're working on it, but that's about all I know.
Yeah. Well, there's not really too much to say about that, but yes, we are trying to get a more accurate cost of training delivery for ALP, because this has obviously been a sticking point for us for a very long time. And I think the biggest issue is that there's so much variability in the way that ALP is implemented, where it's implemented, how many trainees, that sort of thing. So we are in the process of trying to work that out, but it's a colleague of ours, Yamisaraj, who's going to be doing the detailed work with input from us. So we're hoping that this is something we can make available soon in the next in the next few weeks to maybe a couple of months. There's not much I can say about that now, but let me also maybe provide a bit more general information. So around the area of cost. So I've spoken to some of you, or I've spoken to some AMEA members in the past who really want to get a sense of how much ALP costs. And we always say that it's difficult for us to give you a detailed budget, but in my conversations, I'll ask some general questions that can help to kind of give us some rough estimates. So the kinds of, and I should say that we, at least in the way that I try to provide the costing, I separate out the customization and related costs that usually it's IFC and the IFC team. Well, it's not the cost that we incur, but it's the costs that would go to us, to IFC and the developers team. And then the implementation costs, which have to do with the logistics on the ground, which then don't need to go through IFC. And we're not able to give you an estimate for that, right? That depends on the specific context. That has to do with how geographically dispersed your trainees are or your FOs are, which also has implications for travel and accommodation. It has to do with the trainer fees in your particular country and sector. It has to do with translation, which we encourage you to also do locally. So those kinds of costs we don't include in our budget estimation because we just don't have oversight in those. But the kinds of things that we can give you a picture for, and that I will ask you, or that we would ask you in helping to estimate, are how many of the ALP modules you want to use. So which of the, and it depends on the course too. So how many modules you want to use that, because that gives us a sense of how much your content will be, which also, and also who your trainers might be and how many trainers you might have. The number of trainers you have is related to the number of people you want to train. So like Rosemary said, because we try to avoid going over 25 people per training session, then we kind of calculate based on, okay, each training group cohort would be 20 to 25 people. How many trainers you need? And that also impacts how we do the facilitation skills training at the beginning, because we do need time for each trainer to do a teach back in which they demonstrate what they've learned, the skills that they've learned. So the more trainers, the more trainees you have, the more trainers you have, the longer the TOT will be. But if there's a possibility of doing the TOT through some kind of blended learning, which we're experimenting with, we have piloted, it's it's something that's somewhat possible, that will reduce the costs. That will entail some kind of self-paced learning of the trainers. So they're going through the online material, they're doing through some training on their own, and then some facilitated sessions online. So that will help to bring down the costs. And then we also will ask you which country you want to use ALP in which sector, what crop, what commodities you're focusing on, what kinds of FOs. Because if we already have a version of the ALP that's similar to that context, then the customization that's required would be less. Although here we have to be mindful that we can't share one project or one client's content with another's, right? We have to make sure that either it's anonymized or we're able to share a generic version. But either way, for example, in Ethiopia, we're using the ALP in 2 consecutive barley projects, right? So that means very minimal customization because it's the same country, similar FOs, same crop. You're just adjusting the content a little bit. So we would ask you that. Often people think the assessment costs are included, or at least there has been this misunderstanding in the past, because we do say that the scope insight tools are often delivered alongside ALP. Just to be clear, the costs that we provide you for ALP are not, they don't include the assessment costs. Scope Insight is a separate company. It's got its own set of tools. So if you do choose to use Scope Insight assessment or any other assessment, those costs, we don't factor those. We can help you. Maybe we can give you some ballpark figures because we've worked with them before, or connect you with scope people. But the ALP costs are just for the training and coaching, not for the assessment. Yeah, so although I can't say exactly this is what it will cost you, this is what we factor into then the cost calculation when we try to give you a rough or estimated budget. This is what's been calculated for the estimate that we've put in the toolbox guide as well.
Thank you very much, Helena. I think it was very clear. So with that, I want to extend the questions, right? Well, not the question, but the room for asking questions to the participants. So if anyone here has any questions, you can feel free to unmute now and ask your questions directly to Rosemary or Helena.
Hello, this is Ranieri here from Scope Insight. Thank you, Rosemary and Helena, for the presentation. It was very interesting to see, particularly coming from the last week where you had the event that was also very, very interesting. So with regard to costs, suppose a capacity developer would like to go a step further on the blended learning, for instance, using some of the courses, some of the modules on OLC platform, and then using some other physical trainings, combining that, and perhaps even having perhaps remote coaching sessions. I've seen this. I've actually done this when I was working in Kenya with cooperatives there. Do you see, plus combining that with the assessments if they want to be able to maximize the budget? Do you see this? Have you tried this? Have you seen this happening in any other projects? Thank you.
You'll have to unmute. So I guess the project that might have the most data would be what we did with Ethio Chicken. Right, Helena? So Ethio Chicken was a project that, just a typical ALP project. And somewhat atypical, but just a classroom training of grower agents. So basically farmers who were taking day-old chickens and growing them up to pullets and cockerels and then selling them, into the community. And when we did that training program, we did a little bit of a hybrid, because we did business management training, the typical ALP stuff, but then we would do that in the mornings, and then the afternoons they'd get poultry management training from the client, because that was, you could just tell there was just a lot of demand for that amongst these grower agents. And so then later in the project, because the company was growing so quickly, one of the things we wanted to test was whether or not we could use, kind of a chat bot feature. We worked with a company that provides this, and we tested. I guess we had 3 test groups, right? We had the groups that got ALP training and coaching, traditional style. We took a subset of that group, and they got chat messages to kind of continue to help them remember what they learned and try to apply it in their businesses. And then we had a group that all they got was the chat, along with a manual to help support, kind of record the things they wanted to do. And so, that gave us a little bit of a test to see I don't think it's going to help us much on the cost because it was a expensive experiment. And I think the tool we used was really designed for a project that would have maybe 50 or 100,000 farmers in it. And we were using it with a much smaller group. And so the setup costs were significant. And of course, in Ethiopia, you have a lot of translation costs. I think we did 2 or 3 languages, but it did give us a view of how far we could move these, change the behavior or the performance of these enterprises based on how they were getting messages. And we did see quite a few would start on the messaging and then drop off. We also learned about what it would take. And I think, Ranieri, you would understand this, right? Is that like even with coaching or any of the adoption of these tools, it's all based on relationships.
Mm-hmm.
People will do it if someone they really respect is recommending it, right? Or there's a really clear incentive for doing it.
Sure.
But we find that's true in all of our projects. The incentive is really, and the clarity of the incentive is really important. I don't know if that answers your question or not. But we haven't done enough of this, I think, to really answer that.
But do you see? No, thank you. I think it does partially answer my question. Do you see this further developing in the future? Sort of our potential partners, other capacity builders, trying to experiment with this blended learning, doing the TNA and the assessments beforehand, and then deciding, okay, based on what we see, how they're performing here, maybe we want to do this part just on OLC. That way we can save some cash. Then we can do the other components where we require more attention, more focus. We do it physically, and then we can have some additional funding for the coaching if we want. That's do you see this configuration, this customization taking place? Yeah.
I see that's what we moved to. I don't see OLC ever playing a big role simply because it's going to be in English. We're not going to develop on that, I don't think, anymore. It's just, those were the initial digitization we did. We put it up on OLC to make it available. So I think that would be useful. Say scope, we're bringing in new staff not all the time, but you bring in new staff, you're developing new people. You want them to understand what a cooperative is, or you want them to understand more about record keeping or whatever. I mean, it might be helpful when you're training assessors that maybe don't have strong business backgrounds. It might help them understand the questions you're asking a little better. So I could see where scope might find that useful.
Yeah, no, in fact, we've been thinking about that.
Yeah, and that material's there. I mean, you guys could access it. Obviously, it's just in English, but I think it, if you had somebody go through it who's like your, staff development person, they could probably wrap that into what you're doing for staff development. And I think that's true for any AMEA member. I started working in co-ops. I didn't know anything about them. I had to go to a course. How many of us get co-op courses, really?
Yeah.
So I see that's the value of OLC, is building our capacity and maintaining that. But I think as you get younger farmers, as you see, these digital platforms coming in, at IFC, we see this whole ag tech stuff as, it's driving a lot of what we're looking at. We feel like we need to be there and be part of that. And so, yeah, I think
so it could work in some countries,
I'm familiar
right?
with it, but I think it's all going to change.
So it could work in some countries where the infrastructure is present, right? Where telecommunication is reliable, it's affordable, but then not in all country, of course. Okay, no.
Yeah.
No, thank you. That was very useful. Thank you.
Well, thank you for these reflections, Rosemary, and thank you for the question, Ranieri. I see there's also a question from Renee on the chat. Where's a comment? But Renee, I would like to ask if you wanna come out of the mic and ask this question, if there's a question to be asked.
Hi. Yes, it's not so much a question as a comment to you, as you said. And it's related to a request we had from a member, a AMEA member in Peru, where the main question was, how can we fit this content, and it was related on scope as well as ALP, within a new project that was being co-created in the cacao sector in Peru. Specifically, already designed for and with USAID, and not much came out of it. I think the challenges were quite big for them to make it integrate. And then there's the other thing, that a lot of our members also have their own tools that they're already using, and making the decision of going into something new is also considering how much added value does it have over the tools that they already use. So making a decision for a member, or for the teams of a member, comes down also to these 2 points. Is it an added value over what we already have? And does it convince our donor for the project? And in the competitive environment in which we are designing and executing projects, these are, I think, things that come quite close to reality. And then it's also, as it is Peru, the content in Spanish is still to be developed. That's something that NCBA CLUSA mentioned also in the ALP Developers Conference, in which we should take an initiative as AMEA also to see if we can get something together to get not only customized, but also translated to Spanish.
Yeah, I think that I agree. I mean, I think too, you know, I guess I'd say it's a tool that's available. And you know, if I think if I was running an ALP project in Peru, I mean, like, you know, the foundations of cooperative, what do you call it? Foundations of cooperative management. You know, that material was all pulled from Cargill and Telcar. So it was built off of cocoa projects. You know, I think we tried to genericize it so it's not cocoa specific, but you know, you go after those projects based on your experience and your kind of your capability statement, right? Your understanding of the country, the needs, and all of that. I don't know that like the whole ALP course or whatever would necessarily be. I guess if I were doing that project, I would think, okay, can this supplement what I already do? Can this make me stronger at what I'm already foundationally really good at? And then I'd make the case for maybe 3 modules or something like that, and just blend them into what I'm already doing. Because they're probably, I mean, you know how AID works. I mean, that's kind of how I would think about it. I don't think it has to replace, but I think it potentially could be a good supplement or a good add-on, a good value added to what you're already doing, if you've got some gaps. For instance, as you know, Inclusa did which we are missing. They did quite a bit of content around equity and the importance of equity and how to build capital in a cooperative. And I would like to get that and be able to use it in some of my projects.
Thank you for the reflections, Rosemary. Renee, would you like to still ask or continue the discussion or the reflection somehow?
No, it was, as I said, also more a comment and something that we have, as a mayor, we have to think about and to see how we convince our members on making comprehensive package of what we have in the toolbox and what we still miss, perhaps.
Agreed.
But also the donor component is very important. How do we convince and how we sell it to the donors?
Yeah, no, I agree. And actually, this space is also not just for questions, but I think Rosemary is very happy also to discuss ALP in general with everyone. So if you have comments such as Renee's, also feel free to just share them. So yeah, you mentioned the comment about how to convince donors. Any reflections about these, Rosemary, Helena?
We need Alan here.
Or perhaps how it has been done in the past. Yeah.
I would just I would probably just reiterate what I said to Renee in the chat, which has to do with us being able to demonstrate the effectiveness of ALP, right? Because if we can say you need the ALP in your program and it's going to improve your return on investment, then it should be easier to convince them. But so I was saying we use the assessment scores, the pre-training and post-training assessment scores, and the increase that happens in between as a way of demonstrating that. But that's a short-term outcome, right? The long-term impacts of ALP are harder to measure, and something we've talked about a lot with both the IFC M&E team as well as others. And it's something that we're trying to work on. We're trying to find ways that we can go back and measure what the long-term implications would be. But I think we probably should also consider the other ways of measuring ALP's effectiveness, even though results attribution could be somewhat difficult. For example, the way IFC implements ALP is always through client projects, and these clients have a vested interest in strengthening FOs as supply chain partners, right? So if you've got a cocoa buyer, a cocoa processor as the client, and you've got cocoa farmers and cooperatives in your supply chain, then if you can kind of show the number of contracts fulfilled in the supply chain since ALP was introduced versus before, or if you can show the volume of content, the volume of cocoa has increased in the supply of that cooperative since ALP was introduced. I think these are also ways of helping demonstrate. The problem with that, of course, is then the projects are more holistic. They're not just the ALP, they tend to also focus on other aspects. So results attribution can be difficult, but I do think we need, and it comes back to this question, which we wrestle with all the time in AMEA, better, more accurate data about all aspects of the work that we're doing, right? But I think if we are armed with that data, if we have that information, then we can make a compelling case for ALP and therefore be able to get the funding.
And if I may ask, so since you're touching the point of data, so how are the discussions evolving at IFC regarding the role of data, as you just explained? So at which point are you now, and what perhaps can the members help with or count with IFC in the future?
Do you want me to help you with that, Helena? Since I've been drawn into it. So we're looking at, in IFC, we have, this whole, I mean, I'm sure everyone does, we have this whole M&E process. And then there's an auditing approach that looks at that as well. And when we first started ALP, for our kind of impact, we would use the change in performance as measured by scope and say, our goal is to get, 80% of these enterprises to 3.5 or higher, or to improve them by their scores by 20-25%, whatever it be. And the feedback really has been that's an outcome, it's not an impact. And so the impact, as Helena said, typically is increased volumes delivered, or better traceability, or things of that nature. And when we've tried to, and as I see we have several scope folks here. I mean, like even on the access to credit, like in some of our projects, we'll find the folks that score the highest, they don't have enough volume to qualify for credit. In my mind, if I were, like master of the project, I'd say, well, if I've got a small co-op that can really manage itself and handle its activities this well, I'd focus on scaling it, right? They've already got the foundation, build them up. Don't say, oh, they don't access for credit. I would give resources towards them and see if there was a way you could help grow them, because they've demonstrated that they can manage their business. Whereas you've got, sometimes these huge co-ops that have so much volume going through, but they're operating a loss all the time, but they have so much cash that they qualify for, cash-based lending. So, so you get these kind of disconnects sometimes in these projects. And so, we're going to, essentially what we're doing is we have two things going on. We're working with M&E. We're going to be issuing what do they call it? guidance for the project team in terms of how to set up their M&E indicators on a project. Whereas, the change in assessment scores, or, whatever, what we're using to measure like performance or professionalization of the organizations, that'll be an output. And, we'll continue to do that. But when it comes to outcomes or impact, it'll be an outcome. In terms of impacts, we're going to be looking at more volume-based or input sold or, profitability or whatever it might be. So, there's going to be an additional data collection piece. We typically have that in there, but sometimes it can be a little hard to get from the client. So we're looking at how we solve that. But then I think the other piece from ALP is that when we look at saying, what's our value? Everybody says, what is your value? So I think we do have to do a little better. We've got 4 or 5 projects that can come back and show what the change in volumes have been, or what the amount of credit, co-ops within a group were able to access. We're starting to gather more of that, and I think we'll get more systematic on it. Because we started ALP, we immediately rolled it out to about 10 projects. And so all of the assumptions we made that our goal was to increase scope scores, that's in all those projects, and they're still running through. And, frankly, we're meeting those for the most part. But we're finding IFCs like, well, yeah, but we want, and the client, but we want more. We want that. And so we're working on the and how we're going to measure that.
No,
So
excellent.
Stay tuned.
No, excellent. This, I think, as you mentioned in the beginning of the presentation, right? It's how you would measure success. It's how the application of learning is actually being done. So there's a hands up here, Ranieri. Do you want to?
Yes, thank you, Felipe. Actually, thank you, Rosemary, for bringing that up, because that's a very interesting thing, considering particularly the fact that now there's been a huge effort to help countries that are facing food crisis issues and focusing on the ones who are the most, I would say, fragile, right? So in this case, how then can you, I'm speaking as a group, right, as part of AMEA. So how can you then deliver these sort of services, see some of the outcomes improving, but then not being able to show that impact in the end, because they don't have that history of financial transactions, of production at that level that would put them, that would make them attractive to investment in the first place, right? So then it becomes almost, it becomes that a problem that you can't solve, right? I mean, you put in a lot of money in it. There's a lot of funding coming in to shore up these issues of nutrition and food security that are happening now. But then focusing on these cooperatives that are at a very lower level, they may improve in the scope scores, but yet they may not be able to show that impact that you're trying to measure, that you need to get in order to make it, how can I say, worthwhile, right? All the effort that you're making. How to square that? Yeah.
No, I mean, trying to do these impact measures is, it's challenging. And for instance, we're on a project right now, Renee, you'll probably recognize it, but we're working with an off-taker who is quite successful and who gets a lot of product from a lot of smallholder farmers, large numbers of smallholder farmers. And they want to focus on working with some of the intermediaries to see if they can not just get the product, but improve the outcome for the farmers, because they see that their business is growing, they're very successful, but smallholder farmers are still in the same position they were 25 years ago when this company started. And so when we start talking about, well, we're going to increase their volumes by this amount, in my opinion, we're not, because they're already getting that volume. They just want to get it from a different source, right? That pays the farmer a fair price and treats them well. So the farmer does better, but the company's going to they might get a little bit more volume. I'm not going to say they're not going to get any, but it's not going to be a one-to-one. So how do you figure that out? And so I'm like the broken record in that relationship, and so, so you have those kinds of situations that it's not totally clear. And I think from my perspective is what you have to be able to do is explain what's happening. Right. And the other thing is if you do a project like that, you know, those intermediaries, the co-ops or the village-based agents, you know, they're gonna grow, they're gonna do okay. But it's not like the people who are buying that grain now are just gonna go away. They're not just gonna, oh, well, look, you know, that company wants to buy it from somebody else, I'm just gonna go away. They're not gonna do that. They're gonna go in there and compete like crazy for it. And so, you know, so it's gonna be more of a challenge on the ground than I think. It's going to be interesting to see how it unfolds, would be what I would say. So we might miss those impact targets, but you know, I think like anything else, we'll get better over time. And a lot of our projects, we have hit them. But I wouldn't necessarily go back to what Helena said. I'm not sure how much I would attribute it to what we've done.
So, I mean, partners that would donors would probably understand this, right? I mean, you can roll out a project like this and explaining, for instance, just in the way that you've just did, it shows that, I mean, they know, right? They know the reality on the ground. So that would not prevent projects and testing from continuing to take place, right?
Right,
yeah.
Right. Well, and I think, I don't think, you know, if you're in development, you never really feel like you've got the picture is always changing, particularly in agriculture. And so that's why, you know, measuring on, you know, volumes on, you almost have to look at units, but even that fluctuates hugely based on weather. So you feel like you're constantly explaining what happened, not just looking at what happened. It's not like we're building cars.
Yeah.
Thank you. Well, thank you for this exchange. So we still have a couple of minutes for a couple more questions. Though, does anyone else want to ask a question to Rosemary or Helena? And I see there's a comment on chat from Bijiga. Bijiga, I don't know if that's something you want to share with the group also through the mic, or if it's just the chat is fine. But if you do, feel free to come and talk. Yeah, we can see you now, but you're still on mute. You are on mute, Bijiga.
The last point Rosemary raised is about impacts. I think these are what we are discussing is about trainings, and these are a means to the end. So we can measure the impacts of the training on the other side, like the contribution, the attribution that is made due to these trainings. So we incorporate into the running programs, and we measure the impacts of these trainings. Like in our case, we did ALP training, we did a scope insight assessment, and as a follow-up of that, there was ALP training. As a result of that, we strengthened our RUSACOs, saving and credit cooperative. And finally, we see a positive impact on the program participants. Like if you take their income in one of our program area, it increased from like 9,000 birr to 24,000 birr. This is a significant change because that program, the fund was mainly going through this RUSACO cooperatives. So if not, we capacitated that RUSACO, we will not achieve this result. So we can measure that impact on the other ways, how it contributes to the program. There are different factors. This one is one of the contributing factor. Unfortunately, it is very difficult in the evaluation to segregate the contribution of one factor from the whole impacts. So we can acknowledge, we can acknowledge the impact of these trainings on the results that can be brought. The other point I raised is about the content of the training, because there are different trainings which are floating internationally and at the same time at the local level. So the competitiveness of the content, the message that has been contained in that particular document is very, very important, because it has to outshine, it has to satisfy the interest of the users as much as possible so that it can be easily marketable. So I think the maximum care that we have to do is on the content of the training. like the ALP we did. That is very interesting, and it is very suitable. As an example, if we take in the under Ethiopian case, it is very suitable. It's comprehensive. It fits to the realities of it. So it is highly marketable if you consider, like in our case. So the content of the training documents matters a lot in terms of its scalability, marketability, and also in terms of its cost. That was the point which I want to mention.
Yeah, and thank you for making that. It's very good, because one of the things I meant to mention is that, every person on this call is with an organization that has its own purpose and its own mission of what it's trying to accomplish. And so, that last conversation about, outcomes and impact is really, that's kind of an IFC conversation. It's kind of like a therapy session, right? Because, we're working for a corporate client generally. And so, we have different, our outcome, our impact measures could be very different than what yours are. And ultimately, as I said earlier, if we developed ALP because we want to improve the performance and the livelihoods of smallholder farmers, that's ultimately our goal, right? That's ultimately our measure of whether we're successful. But we've also got this other piece that says, have we helped the corporate client accomplish what they're trying to accomplish? And that's usually tied to some sort of investment or loan, either that's going to the enterprises or going to the corporate clients. So our situation becomes, I think, kind of complex quickly, and it may not be particularly relevant to everybody else. But ultimately, what we got to get at is what's the impact on these smallholder farmers we're trying to serve. And we collect a lot of data at IFC, but we have trouble tying it back to the enterprises. So that's another piece that is probably going to play into this activity that we're doing internally. But thank you for that, because that's an excellent point.
Anyone else? We still have 10 minutes, but if there's no other question, I'm also happy to conclude here. We had a very good discussion so far, but let's hear from you first. Any final questions or comments as well? No? Okay, so I just repeating what I just said, I think this was a great first webinar for the Toolbox series, and with very interesting topics that shows how challenging our sector is also, right? So thank you very much, Rosemary, for this presentation. Thank you, Helena, for the support, and thank you all who stayed with us until now, and for your questions as well. And with that, I'd like to close this session and just to remind you that this is a webinar series. So our next one will be in 1 week from now with Scope Insight, when they will present 3 of their tools as well. So hope to see you again next week, and have a great rest of the week. Bye.
Thank you, Felipe, for all your help. I appreciate it.
Thank you, everyone.
And your patience.
Mhm.
All right. Thanks, Elena.
Thank you.
Thanks, Rose.